Chapter 9. Rising Winds. The barrier clouds were worse going up than they had been coming down. Sera worked the crystal arrays beside Caspar, trying to ignore how natural it felt to move in harmony with him after what had happened in the temple. Every brush of their hands sent memories flooding back, of shared magic, of crystal light on bare skin, of possibilities she couldn't let herself want.
Storm front ahead.
Arya called from her position near the bow.
Bad one. The worm's magic must have disturbed the natural patterns.
Sera felt the destabilization in the harmonics around them. The barrier clouds churned with conflicting energies, purple lightning crackling between layers of magic that should never have mixed. Just like her and Caspar, a traitorous voice whispered in her mind. Different magics that worked beautifully together, but might destroy everything in the process.
We need to find a clear path,
Caspar said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Just like that morning in her tea house, when he'd caught her falling and smiled through the explosion. She shook off the memory.
The harmonics are completely unstable. There is no clear path.
Then we make one.
His shoulder brushed hers as he adjusted the crystal array.
Like in the temple, letting the magic find its natural flow instead of forcing it.
That was different.
But even as she protested, her magic was already reaching for his, falling into that perfect synchronization that felt as natural as breathing. The ship rose through the storm, following paths of least resistance between conflicting energy patterns. Sera found herself remembering other moments of harmony between them, working fusion magic in the lower docks, navigating through Drake territory, the way he'd looked at her that first day when she'd been covered in tea leaves, but still somehow fascinating. A massive lightning bolt split the clouds ahead. Caspar pulled her against him instinctively as the ship lurched, his body shielding hers from falling debris. The contact sent warmth flooding through her, even as her mind screamed about complications and secrets and all the reasons this couldn't work.
The harmonics are collapsing!
Lynn's crystalline form vibrated with alarm.
The storm patterns.
I see it.
Caspar cut in, still holding Sera steady as he worked the controls.
Arya, we need more wind magic to stabilize.
The rest of his words were lost in a deafening crack as lightning struck one of the ship's crystal masts. Sera felt the harmonics shatter moments before the mast began to fall. Everything happened at once. She stumbled as the ship tilted. Strong hands pushed her clear of danger. Then a sickening sound of impact and Caspar's grunt of pain. When the chaos settled, Sera found herself safely braced against the crystal array. But Caspar lay crumpled nearby, the fallen mast pinning his leg at an angle that made her stomach lurch.
Lynn.
She screamed, already moving toward him. His face was too pale, his breathing too shallow. The crystalkin healer materialized beside them, her form glowing with healing magic.
The injury is severe. The mass harmonics, they've disrupted his natural energy patterns.
Sera reached for him instinctively, but Lynn caught her wrist.
Wait, your magic is too unstable right now. Your emotions...
I'm fine.
She snapped, even as her hands trembled.
I can help. I can...
Sera.
Caspar's voice was weak but steady. His hand found hers, squeezing gently.
Let Lynn work. I'll be fine.
You don't know that.
The words burst out before she could stop them.
You can't leave me with all these possibilities unresolved, she wanted to say. With all these maybes and might-have-beens hanging between us. His thumb brushed her knuckles in that familiar way that made her heart ache.
Trust me?
The echo of their first real connection, in her workshop, covered in tea leaves and magical residue, hit her like a physical blow. She had trusted him then, instinctively, despite all logic and training. Just like she trusted him now, despite secrets and complications and her own terrifying feelings. That trust terrified her more than anything.
The healing will take time,
Lynn said as her magic began to flow around Caspar.
He'll need to sleep while his energy patterns realign. Mira, help me move him somewhere stable.
As they carefully shifted Caspar to a makeshift bed below decks, Sera forced herself to return to the crystal array. The storm still raged around them. The ship still needed guidance. The mission still had to come first. But her hands shook on the controls, and not just from magical exhaustion.
You'll be all right.
Arya said softly, landing beside her.
Lynn's the best healer in the Sky Kingdoms.
I know.
Sera stared at the harmonics display, not really seeing it.
I can't.
Can't let yourself need him?
Her friend's wings shifted knowingly.
Can't trust that something this complicated might actually be worth the risk?
It's not that simple.
Isn't it?
Arya's feathers rustled with something like frustration.
You two work together perfectly. Your magic harmonizes naturally. You clearly care about each other. So what's really holding you back? His secrets? Or your own fear of letting someone that close?
Sera's hands tightened on the crystal array.
You don't understand. The prince, the order, everything that's at stake.
I understand that you're doing exactly what you always do, hiding behind duty and tradition and proper behavior instead of admitting what you really want.
Arya's voice gentled.
Just like you did with your fusion magic experiments, until circumstances forced you to embrace them.
That's different.
Is it? Because from where I'm flying, it looks like the same pattern. You find something that feels right, something that works naturally, and instead of trusting that feeling, you look for reasons why it can't possibly work.
Before Sera could respond, Lynn emerged from below decks.
He's stable,
She reported.
the healing magic is working, but he'll sleep for several hours while his energy patterns rebuild.
Will
Sera swallowed hard.
will there be any lasting damage?
No, but Sera,
The crystalkin's crystalline features arranged themselves into something like concern.
his last thought before the sleeping draft took effect was worry for you. Not about his injury, not about the mission, just you.
The words hit like another lightning bolt. Sera turned back to the crystal array, blinking hard against the sudden burn in her eyes. She remembered how naturally they'd worked together in the temple, how perfectly their magic had harmonized. Remembered lazy smiles and gentle touches and the way he looked at her like she was something precious instead of something to be controlled. Remembered thinking, in that perfect moment before reality intruded, that maybe this was what had been missing from her carefully ordered life all along. The storm raged around them as she guided the ship higher, following paths through the barrier clouds that she could read as easily as tea leaves. But her mind kept returning to Caspar lying too still below decks, to all the things left unsaid between them, to the future she could almost taste, but was too afraid to reach for. Focus on the mission, she told herself again. But her heart, traitor that it was, kept returning to the terror she'd felt seeing him fall. To the realization that losing him would hurt far more than any scandal or broken tradition ever could. To the growing suspicion that maybe, just maybe, Arya was right about what she was really afraid of. The hidden outpost welcomed them back with pulses of fusion magic that felt like a sigh of relief. Sera helped the others secure the midnight dive, her movements mechanical as exhaustion caught up with her. She kept glancing at the cabin where Lynn tended to Caspar, whose sleep remained unnaturally deep.
He just needs time.
Lynn assured her again as they settled into the outpost's living quarters.
The magical disruption was severe. His energy patterns have to rebuild naturally.
Naturally. The word echoed in Sera's mind as she finally lay down in her assigned room. Like the way they worked magic together, the way they moved together, the way everything between them felt so... Sleep took her before she could finish the thought. In her dreams, she was back in her tea house that first morning. Steam curled in impossible patterns as Caspar caught her. But this time, the moment stretched. This time, his hands lingered on her waist as she studied the scar through his eyebrow. This time, when he smiled that crooked smile, she let herself lean into him instead of pulling away.
Trust me?
Dream Casper whispered against her lips. She woke with her heart racing, the phantom sensation of his touch still tingling across her skin. Outside her window, the eternal clouds had shifted from night purple to dawn rose. Casper still hadn't woken. Unable to sleep more, Sera made her way to the research chamber where they'd stored the deep crystal pieces. Their song filled the room with pure harmonics that made her magical senses hum. She spread her mother's journal across a workbench, comparing the ancient formulas to her own notes about the temple's teachings.
Couldn't sleep either.
Arya asked, landing silently beside her. Her friend's feathers were ruffled from her own restless night.
I think I'm close to understanding something.
Sera traced a particularly complex harmonic pattern in the journal.
About how the deep crystal could stabilize the city's magic. The temple showed us it's not about force or control, but about letting different types of magic find their natural resonance.
Like you and Casper do?
Sera's hand stilled on the pages.
That's not...
Not the same thing.
Arya's wings shifted knowingly.
Tell that to anyone who's seen you work magic together, or fight together, or just exist in the same space together.
Before Sera could respond, Lynn entered with her morning medical report.
His energy patterns are stabilizing, but slower than I'd like. It's as if something's blocking the natural flow of healing magic.
Or someone isn't letting themselves heal properly.
Mira added from the doorway, her augmentations gleaming in the morning light.
Surface Kingdom's stubbornness. Always trying to control everything instead of just letting it happen.
The words struck something in Sera's mind. She turned back to the journal, fingers flying over the pages until she found what she was looking for.
That's it.
She breathed.
The anchor network. We've been trying to control it, to force it into stable patterns. But what if we're approaching it all wrong? What if it needs to find its own harmony, like the deep crystal in the temple?
She pulled out the crystal pieces they'd gathered, arranging them in a pattern similar to the temple's demonstration array. Their song shifted as they resonated together, creating harmonics that reminded her of working magic with Casper.
See how they naturally align?
She gestured to the pattern forming between the crystals.
No force, no control, just letting them find their proper places. Like tea leaves in a perfect blend.
Or like two people who work perfectly together if they'd just let themselves.
Arya suggested innocently. Sera ignored her, focusing on the crystal harmonics.
The city's anchor network. It's like a massive tea blend. Each element needs to find its natural place in the larger harmony. The deep crystal doesn't need to force stability. It just needs to remind the other magics how to flow together properly.
Like what you did in the temple.
Lynn observed.
You and Casper didn't force the crystal apart. You let it separate naturally.
Yes, and in the barrier clouds during the storm, before...
Sera's voice caught as the memory of Casper falling rose up. She pushed it aside, turning back to her notes.
The Order tries to maintain stability through rigid control, through forcing different types of magic to stay separate. But that's what's causing the network to fail. Magic wants to flow together naturally.
Like fusion magic.
Mira said thoughtfully.
Like what keeps this outpost stable.
Exactly.
Sera's hands moved over the crystal array, adjusting pieces slightly. The harmonics shifted, becoming stronger, purer.
We don't need to rebuild the entire anchor network. We just need to remind it of its natural patterns, let it find its own balance again.
Using the deep crystal as a template,
Lynn finished, her crystalline form resonating with understanding.
a catalyst for natural harmony rather than a forced stabilizer.
That's what my mother was working toward.
Sera flipped through more pages of the journal.
Not just fusion magic, but a whole new way of working with magical harmonics. Letting them flow naturally instead of trying to control everything.
She trailed off as the parallel hit her. Wasn't that exactly what she was doing with her own feelings? Trying to control everything instead of letting it flow naturally?
I should check on him.
She said abruptly, standing.
To to see if the healing magic needs adjusting.
Arya's knowing look followed her from the room. Caspar lay too still in the medical chamber, his sun-bleached hair dark against the white pillows. Sera's hands trembled slightly as she checked his magical resonance. The healing patterns were there, but something was blocking them, keeping them from flowing properly. Without thinking, she reached for her magic the way she had in the temple, the way she did with her tea blends. Instead of trying to force healing energy into him, she let her power flow naturally, harmonizing with the existing patterns. His breathing deepened slightly. Some of the tension left his face.
You're good for him,
Lynn said quietly from the doorway.
in more ways than just magical resonance.
Sera didn't look up from Caspar's face.
It's complicated.
Is it? Or are you making it complicated because you're afraid of letting go of control?
I'm not.
But the protest died on her lips as Caspar stirred slightly, turning toward her unconsciously. Her hand found his without her permission, their fingers twining together as naturally as their magic. She remembered the temple, how perfectly they'd worked together when she'd stopped fighting their connection. Remembered all the times their magic had harmonized naturally, creating something greater than either could achieve alone. Remembered her dream, and how right it had felt to just let herself lean into him instead of pulling away.
The deep crystal doesn't force harmony.
She said softly, more to herself than Lynn.
It just reminds things of their natural resonance, of how they're supposed to flow together.
Like some people we know?
Sera squeezed Caspar's hand gently.
He still has secrets.
And you still have fears.
Lynn's crystalline features softened.
But maybe, like the anchor network, those things need to find their own way of harmonizing, instead of being forced into perfect alignment all at once.
Before Sera could respond, Caspar's hand tightened slightly on hers. His breathing changed, and for a moment she thought he might wake. But he settled again, his face turned toward her like a flower seeking sun. She should let go, should return to her research, to the mission, to all the complicated realities waiting outside this quiet room. Instead, she found herself sitting beside his bed, still holding his hand, watching the morning light play across his features. The deep crystal sang in the next room, its harmonics a reminder that sometimes the most powerful magic came from letting go of control. From letting things flow naturally, even if the pattern they found wasn't the one you expected. Even if it terrified you with its possibilities, evening light filtered through the outpost's crystal walls as Sera sat beside Caspar's bed, absently tracing harmonic patterns in her mother's journal. She'd been trying to work in the research chamber, but her mind kept drifting back here, drawn like a compass finding true north.
You know,
She said softly to Caspar's sleeping form.
this would be easier if you were awake to help me figure it out. You always see patterns I miss.
Her fingers brushed his hand where it lay on the blanket. Even unconscious, his magic resonated with hers, creating tiny harmonics that made the air hum.
I used to think that was dangerous.
She continued, watching the play of crystal light across his features.
How naturally we work together. How easily you see past all my careful control to the experimental magic underneath. I thought
She swallowed hard.
letting anyone that close would mean losing myself, losing everything I'd built.
The deep crystal sang from the research chamber, its pure notes carrying through the outpost. Sera found herself humming along with its harmonics, the way she did when brewing particularly complex tea blends.
But that's not how harmony works, is it?
She looked down at their joined hands.
It's not about one element overwhelming another. It's about finding the right balance, creating something new together without losing what makes each part unique.
Something clicked in her mind.
That's it.
She breathed, sitting up straighter.
That's what we've been missing about the anchor network.
She fumbled for her notes with her free hand, unwilling to let go of Caspar with the other.
It's not about forcing stability or maintaining separation. It's about creating a new harmony that preserves the essential nature of each magical frequency.
The deep crystal's song grew stronger, as if responding to her revelation. Sera felt her own magic surge with understanding.
Like fusion magic and T-blends,
She told Casper's sleeping form, excitement building in her voice.
each element keeps its own properties while creating something greater in combination. The deep crystal doesn't need to force the city's magic into alignment. It just needs to remind each frequency of its natural resonance while showing how they can work together.
She squeezed his hand.
That's what you've been trying to show me all along, isn't it? With your surface magic and my sky magic. With all our different approaches combining into something new. Something that works because we're different, not in spite of it.
Took you long enough to figure that out.
Sera's head snapped up. Casper's eyes were open, watching her with that mix of amusement and affection that always made her heart skip.
You're awake!
She started to pull her hand away, old instincts kicking in, but his fingers tightened on hers.
Don't.
He said softly.
I like how our magic harmonizes.
Heat crept up her neck.
How long have you been awake?
Long enough to hear you finally understanding what I've known since that first morning in your tea house.
His thumb brushed her knuckles in that familiar way that sent warmth through her entire body.
That some harmonies are worth the risk of discord.
Even with secrets between us?
But she didn't pull away this time, didn't try to maintain careful distance.
Even with secrets.
His other hand came up to cup her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the touch.
Some secrets protect more than just me, Sera, but that doesn't make what's between us any less real, any less natural.
The deep crystal song swelled around them, and suddenly Sera could see the whole pattern, not just for the anchor network, but for everything.
We need to build a new kind of fusion array.
She said, the ideas tumbling out as fast as they formed.
Not like the Order's rigid structures or the Prince's forced harmonics. Something that works like us. Like how we blend different magics together naturally.
Using the deep crystal as a catalyst rather than a control mechanism.
Casper finished, sitting up despite her noise of protest.
Letting each magical frequency maintain its essential nature while showing them how to work together.
Exactly.
She pulled her journal closer, starting to sketch diagrams.
See? If we arrange the crystals in this pattern, like a tea master's harmony wheel, each piece can resonate with a different type of magic while still maintaining the overall harmonic structure.
Casper shifted to see her drawings better, and she found herself leaning against him without thinking. His arm slipped around her waist as naturally as their magic combined.
The Order won't like it,
he said, but she could hear the smile in his voice.
It goes against everything they believe about maintaining separation between different types of magic.
The Order doesn't like anything I do.
She pointed out, relaxing further into his embrace.
Experimental tea blends, fusion magic, suspicious surface captains.
His laugh rumbled through his chest and into her body.
I think I'm honored to be included in that list.
She turned to face him, suddenly serious.
You should be. You're just as much a breakthrough as any of my magical experiments. Just as natural, just as
She took a deep breath.
essential.
The intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch.
Sera,
I know there are still secrets,
She said quickly.
still complications and dangers, and 1,000 reasons this shouldn't work. But
She gestured to her diagrams, to the harmony wheel of crystal resonance.
sometimes the most powerful magic comes from letting go of control. From trusting the natural harmonics to find their own pattern.
His hand came up to cup her face again.
even if that pattern isn't what you expected,
Even then,
She turned her face into his touch.
maybe especially then.
The deep crystal sang around them as Casper pulled her closer, as their lips met in a kiss that felt like the most natural harmony of all. Their magic merged without conscious thought, making the air shimmer with possibility. When they finally broke apart, Sera found herself smiling.
We should probably tell the others about the breakthrough with the anchor network.
probably.
But he didn't let go of her waist.
Though I think they might have guessed about the other breakthrough already.
Right on cue, Arya's voice called from the doorway.
If you two are quite finished having your emotional and magical epiphany, Commander Chen is here to discuss implementation plans.
They turned to find their friend trying very hard to look stern, despite her quivering feathers.
Implementation plans?
Sera asked, not moving from Casper's embrace.
For your new fusion array design.
Arya's expression turned serious.
The Order is moving faster than we thought. They're already starting to evacuate the lower platforms of Ethertide.
Casper tensed beside her.
The prince?
Offering his protection to anyone who submits to his authority.
Arya's wings shifted with agitation.
Those who refuse are being moved to platforms with failing anchor crystals.
Sera felt cold despite Casper's warmth.
He's forcing them to choose between submission and falling.
Then we better make sure they have a third choice.
Casper squeezed her hand as they stood together.
Ready to show the world a new kind of harmony?
She looked at their joined hands, at her diagrams of natural resonance patterns, at the future they might build if they were brave enough to trust it.
Ready,
She said firmly. And for the first time, she truly was. Chapter 10. Falling Skies. The lower docks platform wasn't just tilting, it was tearing itself apart. Metal screamed as support beams twisted, and entire sections of walkway ripped away into the endless sky. Sera could feel the anchor crystal's desperate song, their harmonics fracturing as the Order's forced separation of magical frequencies tore them apart.
Another support column just failed.
Mira's augmentations whirred as she braced herself against the buckling deck, trying to secure their equipment.
We're losing the whole eastern section.
Above them, Arya battled the wild wind currents that threatened to tear their fusion array apart before they could even set it up. Her wings strained against the chaos, creating pockets of stable air around them as they worked.
The harmonic degradation is accelerating.
Lynn called, her crystalline form pulsing with alarm as she read the magical frequencies.
We have minutes at most before total structural failure.
Casper worked quickly to position their new fusion array, his movements sure despite the unstable footing. A massive crack split the platform nearby, sending a shop cart tumbling into the abyss. He didn't even flinch, his hands steady as he aligned the deep crystal formations in their carefully planned pattern. Secondary anchors failing, someone screamed from the level below. The sound of panic rose from the crowds still trying to evacuate, their fear making the anchor crystal's song even more discordant.
we need to stabilize the primary harmonic points first.
Sera shouted over the chaos, her hair whipping around her face as another section of railing tore free.
Mira, the northwestern junction.
On it.
The augmented woman leaped across a widening gap, her mechanical enhancements giving her the strength to carry 2 of the larger crystal pieces to their designated positions. Lynn flowed through the platform structure itself, her crystalline nature letting her stabilize crucial points from within. Her magic created temporary bridges of pure energy where sections had already fallen away, letting them reach vital anchor points.
Now, Sera.
Casper called as the last piece clicked into place. The platform lurched sickeningly, and she stumbled toward him. His hand caught hers instantly, steadying her as they took their positions at the array's center. Sera reached for her magic, letting it flow into the deep crystal formation they'd arranged in her modified harmony wheel pattern. She felt Casper's power join hers, their energies merging as naturally as breathing. For a moment, she let herself sink into that perfect resonance, that sense of rightness that still terrified her with its intensity. The crystals began to sing. Arya's wind magic caught the harmonics, carrying them outward in expanding rings. Lynn's crystalline resonance amplified the effect from within the structure itself, while Mira's precisely placed enhancement arrays strengthened the pattern at crucial junctions. Pure harmonics spread through the platform's anchor network, not forcing stability, but inviting it. Like tea leaves finding their proper blend, like different magics dancing together in their own way, like her and Caspar. She thought, watching their combined power ripple through the failing crystals. Different but complementary, creating something new without losing what made each unique. Their joined magic felt like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking, like finding a harmony she'd been missing her whole life. The platform's violent motion began to slow. Torn edges drew themselves together as the anchor crystal's song shifted from discord to harmony. All around them, the network that had been screaming in pain began to hum with renewed strength. Not the rigid harmony the order demanded, but something more natural, more alive.
It's working,
Lynn breathed, a crystalline form resonating with the new harmonics.
The anchor network is reestablishing itself, but different somehow, more flexible.
Like fusion magic in the tea house.
Sera said, remembering how she'd learned to let different magical frequencies find their own balance.
Each element maintaining its essential nature while working with the others.
Caspar's hand found hers as they monitored the stabilization process.
You did it.
He said softly.
You found a way to make it work naturally.
We did it.
She corrected, squeezing his fingers.
I never would have seen the pattern without...
A commotion from above cut her off. Order members were descending from the upper platforms, their formal robes streaming behind them as they flew. Their faces showed a mixture of outrage and fear as they took in the newly stabilized harmonics.
What have you done?
The lead member's voice shook with horror.
These harmonics, they're completely uncontrolled. Different magical frequencies mixing freely without proper containment.
Without proper containment, they're working together naturally.
Sera pointed out, stepping forward. She felt Caspar move with her, his solid presence at her back giving her courage.
Look at the resonance patterns. They're stronger than they've been in years.
Stronger, but unstable, unpredictable.
The order member gestured sharply.
This fusion magic cannot be allowed to spread. The risk of harmonic collapse
Is far less than the risk of letting platforms fall because you're too afraid of change to embrace new solutions.
Caspar cut in, his voice hard.
These people deserve a choice beyond submission or destruction.
And who are you to make that choice for them? A surface kingdom exile, a known associate of...
The order member stopped abruptly, something like fear crossing his features. Sera felt Caspar tense behind her.
A known associate of what?
She asked, but the order member was already backing away.
This platform is now under quarantine.
He announced, deliberately not meeting their eyes.
All residents will be evacuated immediately. Any attempt to implement these unauthorized harmonic modifications elsewhere will be met with severe consequences.
You can't just...
Sera started, but a new voice cut through the argument.
Actually, they can't do anything of the sort.
Prince Darius descended from above like a falling star, his yellow silks catching the light in that unnaturally perfect way. But instead of the anger she expected, his jade eyes held something that looked almost like satisfaction as they took in the modified anchor network.
Fascinating,
He said, moving closer to examine the fusion array.
the way you've arranged the deep crystal to catalyze natural harmonic alignment instead of forcing it. Truly brilliant.
He turned that perfect smile on Sera.
Just as I knew you would be, given the right motivation.
Something in his tone made her skin crawl despite the praise. She felt Caspar's hand tighten on hers, felt the way his magic coiled protectively around their connection.
Your Highness,
The order member sputtered.
surely you can't approve of this? This abomination of proper magical practice.
Approve?
The prince's laugh was like crystal chimes in the wind.
My dear man, I couldn't be more pleased. Miss Night Whisper has proven exactly what I've been saying all along, that our old ways of working magic must evolve, that new harmonies are not only possible, but necessary.
He gestured to the stabilized platform around them.
Look at what she's achieved here. A perfect demonstration of why we need to embrace change, to move beyond the Order's outdated restrictions.
His jade eyes fixed on Sera again.
to let those with true vision lead us into a new era of magical innovation.
The Order members exchanged uncertain looks, clearly thrown by this unexpected support. But Sera barely noticed them. She was too focused on the way the prince studied their fusion array, on how his praise felt somehow wrong, despite saying exactly what she'd always wanted to hear.
The evacuation order is rescinded,
he announced smoothly.
This platform will serve as a prototype for my new harmonization initiative, a shining example of what can be achieved when we let go of unnecessary restrictions.
The way he said it made Sera's magical senses prickle with unease. Beside her, she felt Casper's pulse jump where their hands were still joined.
Now then,
the prince continued, that perfect smile never wavering.
I believe we have much to discuss about implementing these innovations more widely. Perhaps over tea?
He held out his hand to Sera.
I have a thought or two about how to improve the resonance patterns even further.
Before she could respond, Casper stepped forward slightly.
We have other platforms to stabilize first,
he said, his voice carefully neutral, despite the tension she could feel thrumming through him.
Of course.
The prince's smile didn't change, but something flickered in his jade eyes.
Though I must insist you coordinate any further modifications through proper channels. We wouldn't want anyone getting the wrong idea about unauthorized magical experimentation, would we?
He gestured elegantly, and one of his guards stepped forward with a scroll bearing official seals.
As a gesture of good faith, and in recognition of your brilliant innovation, I've already arranged for your father's immediate release. All charges dropped, naturally.
His perfect smile warmed slightly.
After all, we can hardly punish someone for nurturing such remarkable talent, can we?
Sera's heart jumped. Her father free? Just like that? She felt Casper's hand tighten on hers in warning, but the prince was already continuing.
Consider it the first of many such gestures,
he said smoothly.
I've always believed in supporting those who show true vision, though I must insist you coordinate any further platform modifications through proper channels, of course. We want to ensure your work receives the recognition and protection it deserves.
The threat was subtle, but clear. Sera felt cold despite the warmth of Casper's hand in hers. The prince's words were everything she'd dreamed of hearing. Support for innovation, recognition of her work, a chance to implement real change. So why did it feel like she was missing something vital? Like there was a pattern here she couldn't quite see.
Think about my offer,
the prince said softly as he prepared to leave.
About everything we could achieve together with the proper support and resources.
His eyes flickered to where she and Casper stood connected.
About what's truly worth preserving as we move forward into this new era.
He ascended into the clouds as gracefully as he'd arrived, leaving Sera with a growing sense of unease. She looked down at the fusion array, at the beautiful harmony they'd created together, and wondered why victory suddenly felt so much like standing on the edge of a precipice.
Sera?
Casper's voice was gentle, but she heard the tension underneath.
We should check the other platforms that need stabilizing.
She nodded, pushing away her doubts. The mission had to come first. Everything else, the prince's strange reaction, the Order members' unfinished accusation about Casper, the feeling that she was missing something important, could wait. But as they prepared to move to the next failing platform, she couldn't shake the sense that something was shifting beneath the surface of their success. Like discord hiding under seemingly perfect harmony. Like secrets waiting to shatter everything they'd built together. Platform after platform stabilized under their combined magic. Each success should have felt like triumph, but something in the Order observers' increasingly hostile stares made Sera's skin prickle with unease. Concordant Elderweave, one of the Order's senior theorists, had been assigned to supervise their work, and his disgust seemed to grow with each demonstration of their fusion magic.
Another abomination of proper magical practice,
he muttered as they finished stabilizing the merchant quarter.
Just like the Eastern Court's corruption.
Sera felt Casper tense beside her at the words, but he kept working, his hands steady as they repositioned the crystal array. She tried to focus on their task, on the way their magic flowed together so perfectly, but doubt crept in like morning mist.
3 more platforms to go.
Arya reported, landing beside them. Her feathers bristled slightly at Concordant Elderweave's presence.
The residential sections are showing signs of extreme harmonic degradation.
They moved quickly to the next site, their team working with the efficiency of practice now. Mira's augmentations whirred as she secured crucial junction points. Lynn's crystalline form flowed through structural weaknesses, strengthening them from within. And Caspar moved with the sure confidence of someone who understood exactly what they were doing, almost as if he'd seen something like this before. The thought sent an unexpected chill through Sera. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on the complex harmonics needed to stabilize the residential platform. Their magic merged naturally, creating that perfect resonance that still made her heart skip. But for the first time, she found herself wondering why he was so good at this, why he understood fusion magic so intimately.
Disgusting.
Concordant Elderweave spat as another platform stabilized under their combined power.
Using Eastern Court techniques right here in Ethertide, as if we haven't seen the devastation they cause.
These arrays are nothing like Eastern Court magic.
Sera protested, though something in her gut twisted at the way Caspar wouldn't meet the theorist's eyes.
We're working with natural harmonics, not forcing...
Natural?
Concordant Elderweave's laugh held no humor.
Ask your precious captain about natural harmonics. About how the Eastern Court's stabilization program started. About who designed their original fusion arrays.
The world seemed to stop. Sera turned to Caspar, expecting... She didn't know what. Denial? Explanation? But his face had gone carefully blank in a way she'd never seen before.
Caspar?
Her voice sounded small, even to her own ears.
He hasn't told you.
Concordant Elderweave's voice dripped satisfaction.
Of course he hasn't. The great Captain Vale, the prince's right hand, his closest advisor and friend, the architect of their entire stabilization program.
That's not...
Caspar started, reaching for her, but Sera stepped back.
The weapons they're using to destabilize cities.
Concordant Elderweave continued relentlessly.
The corrupted crystals that tear anchor networks apart. Who do you think developed them? Who do you think showed the prince how to break harmony itself?
I didn't know what he planned to do with it.
Caspar said, his voice rough.
Sera, please, when I realized...
When you realized?
Concordant Elderweave cut in.
When exactly was that? Before or after how many platforms fell? Before or after how many people died? Before or after Sera's mother discovered what you were doing and tried to stop you?
The world tilted beneath Sera's feet. She remembered the prince's strange reaction to their arrays, his immediate understanding of the principles involved. Remembered how familiar Caspar had been with fusion magic from the start, how easily he'd worked with her experimental techniques, how he'd appeared in her tea house exactly when the Order began investigating fusion magic.
Sera.
Caspar moved toward her again, his dark eyes desperate.
Yes, I helped develop the program. Yes, I worked with the prince. But when I saw what he really intended, what he was willing to do...
Did you kill my mother?
The question hung in the air between them like broken glass. Sera watched Caspar flinch as if she'd struck him.
No,
he whispered.
But I might as well have. The research she found, the weapons she tried to destroy, they were mine. My work. She died trying to stop what I'd helped create.
Sera felt the truth of it in her bones, in the way their magic still hummed between them, perfect and terrible, in how naturally they worked together, their powers complementing each other like they'd been designed to, like he'd designed them to.
The residential platforms.
Arya cut in urgently.
They're still failing. We need to...
I'll do it myself.
Sera said, her voice steadied despite the chaos in her chest.
Concordant Elderweave can supervise. The rest of you?
She swallowed hard.
The rest of you should go.
Sera, please.
Caspar's voice cracked.
Let me explain. Let me tell you about why I...
People are dying.
She cut him off.
The platforms are failing. I don't have time for more secrets or half-truths or carefully crafted explanations.
She turned away, unable to look at him.
You should have told me before everything.
Before I let myself trust you. She didn't say. Before I let myself imagine a future where harmony was possible. She felt him step back, felt the physical distance echo the chasm suddenly yawning between them. Their magic still reached for each other, still wanted to combine in that perfect resonance that now felt like ash in her mouth.
The platforms,
she said again, moving toward the residential section. She couldn't think about anything else right now, couldn't let herself feel the way her heart was tearing itself apart. Behind her, she heard Arya's wings snap open, heard Mira's augmentations whir as they prepared to leave, heard Lynn's crystalline form shift in uncertainty, heard Casper's footsteps pause, just for a moment.
I never lied about how I feel,
he said softly.
About what's between us. That harmony. It's real. Even if you never believe anything else about me, please believe that.
Sera didn't turn around. Couldn't. The platforms were failing, and she had work to do, and she absolutely could not think about how his voice broke on the word harmony, or how their magic still reached for each other, or how everything she'd thought she understood had just shattered like dropped crystal. The residential platforms needed stabilizing. The city needed saving. Everything else would have to wait until she could breathe again without feeling like her chest was full of broken glass. The last residential platform was the worst. Sera could feel the wrongness in its harmonics even before she finished setting up the crystal array. The anchor network screamed with discord that matched the chaos in her own heart, making it nearly impossible to focus on the delicate patterns needed for stabilization. Her hands shook as she positioned the deep crystal pieces. Without Mira's strength or Lynn's resonance support, every component felt heavier. Without Arya's wind magic to stabilize the currents, the platform's slight movements kept disrupting her careful arrangements. Without Casper, nothing felt right.
The northern section is starting to buckle.
Concordant Elderweave observed coldly from his safe position near the platform's center.
Perhaps if you hadn't sent away your collaborators.
Sera ignored him, trying to sink into that space where magic flowed naturally. But her mind kept catching on fragments of revelation, Casper designing the weapons that killed her mother, Casper working with the prince, Casper keeping secrets even as he'd held her and kissed her and made her believe in harmony. The crystal array sparked dangerously as her emotions bled into the magic. She pulled back, breathing hard, trying to find her center the way she did when brewing particularly difficult tea blends. But even that brought memories now. The way he'd caught her that first morning, steadying her through the explosion. The way he'd known exactly how to work with her magic, because of course he had. He'd helped design the very weapons that used these principles.
The western support struts are failing,
Elderweave announced, as if commenting on the weather.
Though I suppose that's to be expected when one attempts to stabilize harmonics while in such obvious emotional discord.
I don't recall asking for your analysis.
Sera snapped. But he was right. Her magic kept slipping, kept trying to reach for a harmony that wasn't there anymore. The crystal array hummed with unstable energy that matched her churning thoughts. She tried again, reaching for the pure frequencies she'd worked with in the temple. But even that memory was tainted now. Had Casper known what they'd find there? Had he recognized the ancient fusion arrays because he'd based his weapons on their principles? Had anything between them been real? The platform lurched sickeningly as another support gave way. Below, she could hear the panic of residents who hadn't managed to evacuate in time. Their fear resonated with the failing anchor crystals, creating feedback loops of discord that made her teeth ache.
If you can't manage it,
Elder Weave said silkily.
I'm sure the prince would be happy to offer his protection to these people. For a reasonable price, of course.
The suggestion sent ice through Sera's veins. She remembered the prince's perfect smile, his immediate understanding of their arrays, his strange satisfaction at their success. Remembered Casper's words about him, closest advisor and friend. The crystal array crackled with dangerous energy as her concentration slipped again. This wasn't working. She couldn't find harmony when everything inside her was breaking apart. Focus on the mission, she told herself firmly. But for the first time, technical knowledge wasn't enough. The deep crystal needed more than just proper arrangement. It needed that natural resonance she'd discovered with... No, she wouldn't think about that. Another support failed. The platform's tilt became more pronounced, and screams rose from the levels below. Sera felt tears of frustration building behind her eyes as she tried again to work the stabilization magic alone. But she wasn't meant to work alone. None of this was meant to be done alone. The whole point of their breakthrough had been about harmony, about different elements working together naturally. The realization hit her like lightning. She'd been trying to force stability, just like the Order did, just like she'd always done with her own life, controlling everything, maintaining perfect balance, never letting anything flow naturally for fear of what might happen. And look where that had gotten her. Sera closed her eyes, letting her tears fall freely now. Let them come. Let everything come. The pain, the betrayal, the knowledge that she'd trusted and been hurt. The fury at Casper's secrets, and the worse fury at herself for still wanting to hear his explanations. The grief for her mother, and the grief for what she'd thought she'd found with him. The crystal array began to hum. She felt the harmonics shift as she stopped fighting her emotions, stopped trying to maintain perfect control. Like tea leaves finding their proper blend, like magic finding its natural flow, like hearts finding their own rhythm. The platform's song changed. The anchor crystals didn't just stabilize, they began to sing with new harmonies. Not the rigid patterns the Order demanded, not the forced alignment the Prince sought, but something that grew from accepting discord as part of harmony. When Sera opened her eyes, the platform had steadied completely. The crystal array pulsed with pure, natural resonance that spread through the anchor network like sunrise through morning mist. She had done it. Alone, broken, crying. She had still done it. The realization broke something loose in her chest. She fell to her knees beside the still humming array, tears flowing freely now. All the fear and pain and betrayal she'd been holding back crashed through her defenses at once.
How interesting.
The voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Sera looked up through her tears to see yellow robes catching the evening light.